In early 2026, the world's eyes turn to the Caribbean as the Trump administration launches a major military operation in Venezuela, citing threats to regional stability and American interests. The White House frames this as a mission to restore democracy and counter narco-state activities. But the move sends shockwaves across the globe. Swift naval blockades, targeted airstrikes, and support for opposition forces define the operation's opening phase. President Trump calls it a decisive action to prevent humanitarian disaster and dismantle a corrupt regime. Yet, this bold move creates uncertainty. How will the region react? What will global powers do? The intervention comes as the global order is already shifting, with the U.S. pursuing transactional diplomacy and China expanding its influence through economic means. For Beijing, Venezuela is a test case, a chance to contrast its non-interventionist, commerce-driven model with America's forceful approach. China doesn't need to act militarily. The U.S. intervention itself lets Beijing present itself as the stable, predictable alternative. This crisis is more than a local conflict. It's a stage for the world's great powers to redefine their roles. The battle for Venezuela is also a battle for the future of global leadership. The U.S. intervention in Venezuela spotlights two clashing foreign policy philosophies. America relies on military might and the promotion of democracy, often acting unilaterally to reshape hostile regimes. The Venezuela operation is classic: identify a threat, use force, and aim for rapid regime change. China, meanwhile, builds influence through infrastructure, loans, and trade, offering development without political strings. Its Belt and Road initiative appeals to nations wary of Western pressure, emphasizing non-interference. As U.S. forces engage in combat, China points to its own investments in Latin America as a more constructive partnership. Beijing's careful statements reinforce its image as a responsible, law-abiding power. For the Global South, the choice is clear. U.S. partnership comes with conditions and risks, while China offers economic engagement. The Venezuela crisis becomes a live demonstration of these models. America's intervention reinforces its image as a revisionist power, while China quietly gains ground by working within the system. The world is watching and choosing. To predict Venezuela's future, look to America's past interventions. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, each began with clear goals but ended in chaos, insurgency, and regional instability. Removing a regime is only the first step. Rebuilding fractured societies and economies is far harder. These precedents haunt U.S. planners now. China, by contrast, has avoided military entanglements, focusing on economic expansion and risk-averse diplomacy. When conflict erupted in Libya, China evacuated its citizens and waited to engage with the new authorities, preserving its interests without force. While the U.S. spent trillions on wars, China invested in global trade and infrastructure. Each American intervention has opened space for China to advance its position. Venezuela is the latest chapter in this ongoing story. The diplomatic fallout from Venezuela is immediate and revealing. European allies issue cautious statements, calling for diplomacy but withholding support, reflecting a desire for autonomy and fatigue with U.S.-led interventions. In Latin America, responses are split. Colombia supports the U.S., while Brazil and Mexico call for non-intervention, exposing deep regional divides. The Organization of American States is paralyzed, unable to reach consensus. Meanwhile, China and Russia seize the initiative at the UN, calling for emergency meetings and condemning the violation of sovereignty. Their rhetoric resonates with non-aligned nations, casting the U.S. as a unilateral actor. These diplomatic moves shape global perceptions of legitimacy and power. The U.S. spends military and political capital. China gains influence by championing stability and international law. Every divided vote and joint Sino-Russian statement reinforces Beijing's narrative. The contest for Venezuela is also a contest for the story of global leadership. Right now, China is winning the narrative war. The world is taking note. Venezuela's vast oil reserves are often cited as the motive for U.S. intervention, but this is outdated thinking. The U.S. is now a top oil producer and net exporter. It no longer needs Venezuelan crude. The real impact of revived Venezuelan oil production would be lower global prices, benefiting China, the world's largest oil importer. China's economy relies on cheap energy, so a stable Venezuela is a direct economic boon for Beijing. Ironically, U.S. intervention could end up subsidizing China's growth. China is also Venezuela's largest creditor, with billions in outstanding loans to be repaid in oil. A new government in Caracas would need to negotiate with Beijing to restructure and honor these debts. Thus, American military action secures China's financial interests. The U.S. takes the risks. China stands to gain. It's a geopolitical irony lost in the rush to act. America's unilateral action in Venezuela is straining alliances and prompting partners to rethink their strategies. Canada, long aligned with Washington, now refuses military involvement and pivots toward Asia, seeking new trade deals and greater independence. This shift is echoed by other allies. Japan and South Korea, reliant on U.S. security, now question Washington's focus and seek deeper regional ties, including with China. The intervention, meant to show strength, instead breeds anxiety and encourages diversification. For China, this is a strategic windfall. It gains by simply being the stable alternative. U.S. policy is driving allies to hedge their bets and look eastward. The bonds of the post-war order are loosening. As America's alliances fray, China's influence grows without confrontation. The Venezuela crisis accelerates a global realignment. The world's balance of power is quietly shifting. The U.S. intervention in Venezuela strains the very institutions it once championed. The UN Security Council is sidelined by Chinese and Russian opposition, forcing America to act alone and undermining the Council's authority. Each unilateral move erodes the legitimacy of global governance. China capitalizes, presenting itself as a defender of the UN Charter and arguing for reforms that would give emerging powers more voice. The Organization of American States is fractured, its credibility as a mediator in tatters. Regional consensus is shattered, and diplomatic pressure gives way to division. This vacuum allows China to expand its economic and diplomatic initiatives in the Americas. Weakening these institutions serves China's interests, accelerating the shift toward a multipolar world. The liberal order decays, and China's model of state-led diplomacy thrives. At its core, the Venezuelan crisis is about economics and China's patient capital strategy. As Venezuela's largest creditor, China's loans are secured by future oil deliveries, now threatened by the country's collapse. U.S. intervention paradoxically helps China. Any new government will need to negotiate with Beijing to restructure debt and restart oil flows. China's deep economic ties ensure it remains indispensable, regardless of who rules Caracas. The U.S. spends resources on regime change. China waits to collect. America acts as a high-risk collection agency for Chinese debt, stabilizing the environment for Beijing's benefit. This highlights the asymmetry of power, U.S. military might versus China's economic leverage. In Venezuela, American action ultimately serves Chinese interests. China's position as creditor-in-chief gives it lasting influence. The future of Venezuela will be shaped as much by Beijing's balance sheets as by Washington's troops. The outcome of America's intervention in Venezuela is uncertain, but the strategic consequences are clear. The crisis exposes the stark contrast between U.S. force and China's economic statecraft. Beijing's narrative of peaceful partnership gains traction worldwide. The U.S. strains alliances and institutions, while China quietly expands its influence. Military power alone is no longer enough. Economic leverage and narrative control are now crucial. The Venezuela episode may be remembered less for its immediate outcome than for what it revealed about global leadership. America pays the price to enforce its will. China reaps the benefits by standing back. The world order is being subtly, but inexorably, redefined.